So we're coming to the end of the session, and Anna's going to be on stage, and there will be a chance for some questions at the end. So if you do remember, on your phones, you can ask questions via the app. Anna Sampson, everyone.
Afternoon, everyone. Wow, I don't know how many of you have been here since the beginning of this morning, but it really feels like attention's having a moment. There's been so many common themes that I've heard throughout the course of this morning, and hopefully if you haven't been here, I'm going to do a good job of summarising some of those with a whistle-stop tour in about sort of 10-15 minutes of some key principles that you might want to remember. So my name's Anna Sampson. I'm Insight and Strategy Director at Magnetic. So Magnetic represents the magazine industry, and we've been talking about attention for the last couple of years. And it's a topic that I'm actually really personally fascinated in. 20 years ago, when I started in market research, I was really interested in the theories of Robert Heath. He talks about peripheral attention, but now, attention is absolutely having its moment. And I think that's because it's kind of the collision of how research technology has come about, and the fact that we can now measure behaviour really accurately online from kind of fabulous people like Mike Follett at Lumen and his eye tracking technology. But when you collide that with understanding the human brain as well, and perhaps more established ways of understanding consumer behaviour, insight, psychology and behavioural economics and neuroinsight, you can understand bringing those two things together is really powerful. So Magnetic have done like a whole body of research over the last couple of years on attention, and we've used both of those providers. And I'd urge you, if you're interested in attention, to do the same, because you need to understand it across the broad spectrum of what attention is. So I promised that I'd talk about the fact that not all impressions are equal, and what are the key things that we can learn. But first of all, I sort of wanted to underline how important a topic it is, and the fact that the industry is colliding around it. Because the evidence that attention matters is just growing, like so much at the moment. It's been mentioned a couple of times this morning already, but brilliant work from the Attention Council is making links between attention and other KPIs, such as sales, brand metrics, conversions, all sorts of things. And their white paper, which you can get on their website, is a really good read for any kind of evidence that you need to prove your client or your boss that this is a topic that we should all be thinking about. And Walk recently published a white paper on it. That's a really credible source in the advertising research space, and they deem it an important topic now as well. So there's some useful stuff from them. So it's a really, really important topic. And we kind of started getting interested in attention a couple of years ago, and we began by doing a print study, but it wasn't long before we knew that we needed to do something digital, and that's what I'm here to focus on today. And this analysis from Mike at Lumen is the thing that caught our attention first off. So he uses a metric called attention seconds per 1,000 impressions, and he continually monitors via eye tracking attention online. And this is a massive data set that he's got to understand, what types of environments online and getting eyes and getting consumers' attention. And we saw that published media in particular was getting higher levels of attention than other types of sites. So task sites, for example, like eBay and Rightmove. Now, nothing wrong with eBay and Rightmove, perfectly good sites for consumers who have got, those particular tasks in mind, but not great sites, as it turns out, for getting attention to your advertising. And I think this is really interesting because there's almost a bit of a paradox in marketing right now. The invention of this, especially smartphones, makes everyone think that our jobs are a lot easier because we're all walking around with a device in which we can target our consumers. Surely that should be making our job easier. But actually, as well as being a way to target the consumer, it's like the perfect distraction device, isn't it? You're on your phone, but you're constantly pinging from one thing to another. So it's not as simple as to go, oh, I need attention from the consumer. The attention's always on, the consumer's attention is always on the phone, therefore I'll advertise on digital and on mobile. But it's not as simple as that, because actually it's really hard to get consumers' attention online. And so what I'm going to show you is some data from some work that we did around different types of websites for attention online, but then also kind of pull back from that and think about what the common themes are that we can all take into practice when we're planning and buying. So the work that we did in collaboration with Mike at Lumen uses a methodology that I'm just going to briefly touch on and not go into too much detail. The study that we did with him used exactly the same methodology that he would use with a client who's an advertiser or with an agency or with a media owner. And effectively what Mike does is he converts a panelist's camera on their phone to an eye tracking device so that then he can see what they're looking at. He can do that on mobile and he can do that on desktop. So that's the bit of kit that he uses. And then that data is then captured. And then he also serves them a standard questionnaire where he can ask about recall and intention to purchase. So when we worked with him, we created stimulus for our panelists to see. And these were effectively mocked up magazine pages, exactly the same types of experiences that magazine website readers would experience in the real world. The ads were placed in the same sorts of places, and we just monitored where they were looking and what advertising was getting their attention. And then we did that survey at the end. And Mike delivers the data back to all of his clients in this funnel. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but the nub of this is that he combines standard industry viewability metrics with his eye tracking data. And the eye tracking data looks at two key variables that I'm going to draw your attention to. The first one is the amount of people that looked at the ad based on the technology that he uses with his eye tracking. And then the second one is how long did they look at the ad. And then those two metrics, the viewed and then the eyes on dwell time, are combined into that single metric that's really widely quoted. I've heard so many people quote it this morning, of the attentive seconds per 1,000 impressions. And that's the metric that you can use to judge the success of your advertising. So this is the key slide from the study that we did that I'm just going to flag, and then I'm going to go on to the principles. So we looked at magazine website pages, and we're able to compare them to Lumen norms. Now, Mike wouldn't let us compare ourselves to the long tail. He didn't think that was fair. So he's comparing us to the kind of quality norms, other types of content sites online, and then also to social media. So when you look at this data, and it's because of the amount of people that looked and the dwell time, when you combine those two things, magazine websites are delivering really strongly. And from this we can see that magazine websites are twice as effective at getting attention than Lumen norms in terms of quality digital display. And also, I'd like to draw your attention to mobile on that chart as well, because actually when it comes to magazine mobile environments, they're really stacking up against social media. So it's a real important consideration if you're kind of planning campaigns to think about using magazine environments in mobile. And actually, increasingly, publishers are working and pushing out their content through social media environments. So there's an opportunity to combine those two things as well. So I wouldn't say that I'm pitting one against the other. I think it's about thinking about quality environments, where the content is, and how you can make it relevant to the consumer. And I guess if we think about it from our own behaviour, this kind of feels quite intuitively true. When we're scrolling on Facebook, it's a different experience, isn't it? So when you go on The Times or Wired magazine or whatever quality publisher you might personally engage with, Facebook is designed to be scrollable, to move through the content quite quickly. Whereas when you're engaging with an article that you want to read, that's got your attention, that's on a topic matter that interests you, you're spending time reading through that content. And that has an impact on the advertising that's placed there, because there's longer windows of viewable time for the ad to get noticed. So those types of environments have a real value. And just to remind you, if you haven't seen this chart already so many times today, attention matters. I'm talking about it, but why does it matter? It's because it's linked to sales and other KPIs. So that's why this stuff's really important. And I'm just quoting Karen Nelson-Field here, but I'm also quoting loads of work from the Attention Council that's kind of drawn loads of work together to prove that attention is linked to other KPIs. So if we accept that attention matters and that we should be buying high quality, high attention environments, what principles can we apply? Can we think about the decisions that we make when it comes to planning? I've got 5 key principles and then it's a kind of wrap. They're quite snappy. So the first one, actually, before I do that, another little bit of evidence that attention is linked to recall. This was from our own study. We can see that the more time readers in our own study looked at the ads, the more likely they were to recall the brand. So on to those 5 principles. So the first one, if you care about attention, you should be choosing slow media. So this evidence from Mike again shows that scroll speed is correlated to attention. If a consumer or reader is scrolling slowly, they're more likely to be paying attention to the ad. So slow scrolling media, like published media, creates long windows of viewable time for the ads to get noticed. So that's the first principle. The second one is that we need to think more about context, and this is a theme that's come up quite a lot today already. And I'm actually going to quote a really smart fellow called Faris Jacob. So loads of people have talked about data and different research methodologies when it comes to attention, but I also think frameworks are quite useful. And Faris has got a really handy framework here, and he's written a book about attention called Paid Attention, which I do urge you to read. So this framework basically acknowledges that when we're depleted of energy, we often default to easy media that requires less of us as a form of distraction. So think doom scrolling and the stuff at the top of the pyramid there. But with time on our side, we choose demanding, more immersive formats such as cinema, long reads and podcasts. And that's the media that you see in the kind of brown and green layers in his pyramid. And they're more successful vehicles for emotional impact and brand building. And they're the examples of environments where you can get quality attention, sustained attention on your advertising. And he urges us all to think about, rather than settling for the efficacy of reaching a target audience as cheaply as possible, which could be established by a spreadsheet or an algorithm, that we should think about this framework because it encourages us to consider the role of context and mindset. And the work that we did with Lumen, we were able to, because we showed pages to consumers of fashion magazines with fashion ads in, but we also put the fashion ads in food titles. So we're able to break down the data to show what's the impact of placing an ad in a relevant context. And actually what you can see here is that in-context advertising is more powerful. So there's a value here, especially for published media, I think, because published media has got plenty of opportunities to make your advertising super relevant. You know, you've got fashion, you've got film, you've got food, you've got music, you've got motoring, you've got Minecraft. You know, whatever your category that you're working in, there's probably a title that's relevant. And if there isn't, there's also an opportunity to make it relevant. So, for example, we worked with Smart Energy. Obviously, you haven't got a magazine on the energy environment, but they were able to make their message super relevant by talking about how you consume energy in the home. And they worked with like different versions of that execution for different audiences. So for millennial audiences, they did some getting ready to go out copy and what energy you're consuming. And then for older audiences who are into kind of gardening, they sort of looked at, you know, what are you consuming with your smart energy device when it comes to using your lawnmower, etc. And that copy got what is probably quite a low involvement category that's going to struggle to get the consumer's attention. It delivered results because it made it relevant. So don't think, oh, there isn't a magazine or a website by a publisher that covers my category, because there might be opportunities to make it relevant too. And actually, work that Mike's done in association with the IAB kind of makes the same point. So he looked at, with them, kind of audiences that were in market versus out of market, and was able to show that those in market are more likely to pay attention than those aren't. And this point also about targeting engaged and passionate audiences is really key. So I think this is from a report that we did with Enders, which you can find on our website if you look for the butterfly. And it makes a really important point about targeting, which, when you're thinking about targeting from a digital perspective and you're thinking about algorithms, is probably something that's not fully appreciated, because targeting based on audience data doesn't exploit relevance completely fully as it could do. It targets people, and not necessarily always people in places where they're looking at relevant content. And it also kind of ignores the value of a message being overheard by others in a shared community. So this is the idea that, for example, a fashion brand advertising on Vogue.com doesn't just benefit from targeting a luxury audience potentially close to purchase, but also benefits from a feeling from the consumer who's reading that their peers who share their interests and values are seeing the same message, and the social approval that brings. Now, in luxury fashion, social approval is a really important thing to kind of leverage. There's other categories where that's important, like automotive, for example. And I think when you're thinking about targeting and data and algorithms, like that as an opportunity is probably something that's overlooked. So do check out this report for a bit more detail on that. And I think also, I'd like to go back to some of the work that Shazia talked about earlier with regards to targeting engaged and passionate audiences, because there's a neurometric that's relevant to this called emotional intensity. And when you measure brain responses of people reading, because we did some work with her, of people reading print advertising, magazines really delivers when it comes to emotional intensity, which is a part of the brain that has an impact on attention levels. And emotional intensity is this extent to which someone is energized or engaged with a piece of communication, captivated, engrossed. It's that kind of value. So there's some neurometrics that are really relevant when you're trying to understand this type of attention as well. I don't know what number I'm on now, fourth principle, I've got 5. This is the fourth principle. So the fourth principle is choose trusted content. This is some work done by the AOP for published media in general, so across magazines and news brands. And they did a bit of work that showed that consumers really trust published media and the content compared to other portals or social networks. And the reason why this is important, I haven't got both charts in here because I didn't want to kill you with bar charts. But if you go and have a look at this report, the other thing that's important is not only do they trust the content, but they trust the advertising as well. So what we're seeing here is a kind of halo effect going on for advertisers that choose to select trusted environments. So that's really key as well. And then finally, and I think this is a really important principle actually, really, really key. If you want people to pay attention to your advertising, you need to create positive advertising experiences. So a white paper created by the AA back in 2019 urged the industry to improve the advertising experience because they've been tracking for a long time that consumers are getting increasingly ignored by advertising. So yes, this is great, you can target everyone, but it's also pissing everyone off because they're over-targeted and it's interruptive. And what they found in this report was really key. And at the time, outgoing president and Unilever Chief Marketing Officer Keith Weed called for the industry to tackle the issue of bombardment in an effort to turn around the fact that consumers were turning off and ignoring advertising, and actually our job was getting harder. And they did a massive survey of 2,000 consumers to create a framework for what consumers' attitudes to advertising were. And they found that bombardment was the biggest issue that our industry is facing in terms of getting attention to advertising. And bombardment is made up of the following factors: excessive volume, repetition, obtrusiveness, and irrelevance. And unfortunately, all of those things are things that digital advertising is really guilty of when it's not done well. And actually, Mike's got some more evidence that basically backs that up. So work done by Lumen shows that when you've got more ads on screen, when it's more cluttered, you're going to get less attention. So advertisers need to be seeking out environments that are low clutter when it comes to attention. So, well, can't read that one very well, but hopefully I'm going to make it clear in terms of the 5 principles. I'm just going to go through them really simply again as a reminder before I wrap. So the first principle was slow media. Magazines are regarded as the slower media experience, intensely read articles that create long windows of viewable time for ads. You also need to tap into relevant context because you're more likely to get a consumer's attention. Magazines are one way to do that. Podcasts might be another, cinema could be another. There's certain types of media that do well when it comes to relevance. You should also opt for trusted content. Journalists in particular are trusted and because they're experts in their chosen field. They're trained in how to write, they're passionate about the topic that they're writing about, and that gets attention on the content, which then translates into attention on the advertising. And then finally, that critical point at the end, you need to create or be an environment where there's a positive advertising experience. In print, actually, ads are non-interruptive. It's one of the environments where consumers are least annoyed by advertising. But even in digital publisher environments, they're much more likely to offer a fewer, better ads than a kind of cluttered environment. And magazine consumption is acknowledged as time well spent. And when people are in a positive frame of mind, you know, when they're not doom scrolling, they're more open to advertising. Now, whilst I've been really focused on digital, because that's what people always want to hear about, we did start out this journey by looking at print, and we did a big study actually in collaboration with PhD. We looked at the power of print to deliver attention, and I wouldn't underestimate the value of that, and it's definitely in need of a renaissance using print advertising, because actually magazine advertising and newspaper advertising is the most welcome, the least ignored, and perceived as the most relevant, and it doesn't suffer from those bombardment issues that I talked about earlier. And also, I think you've probably seen this a few times, the cost piece, because often your clients might assume, well, yeah, great, I want quality attention, but I've got a budget as well and I've got to stick to it. But all the analysis that Lumen have been doing in collaboration with Ubiquity, and we did something similar in this report, shows that you don't necessarily have to pay more to get quality attention. And when you put those two variables together, you can see that there's some cost efficiencies to be had. So just before I wrap up, a reminder that attention matters because it's linked to sales and other KPIs, and you will have seen loads of that evidence already today. And then even more than that, so many clients are now planning for attention. So Mars, ABI, British Gas, the Co-op and Coca-Cola have joined that club of planning for attention. So I hope I've inspired you to do the same and to perhaps consider magazine environments in print or online when you're planning for attention. And if you want any more information on the work that I've talked about, then go to our website and you'll find absolutely stacks of stuff there. Follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. And we've just created a new page called the Attention Hub, where we're trying to gather together all the stuff on attention, not just our own, but the brilliant work from NeuroInsight and from Lumen. Dentsu have just done a piece, that's on there. All of the stuff from Faris, he's a genius when it comes to attention. We're just trying to put it all in one place so anyone who's interested can find it quite easily. So that's a great resource for anyone who's interested. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Anna. That was really, I could strongly advise you the Attention Hub. It is a very valuable resource. Anna and her team have edited it all for you. There are loads of questions. We're a little running out of time, so I've got one question for you, which is repeated a couple of times, which is, we live in a world where fast is always better. Yeah. And one of your points here is that slow media are a good thing.
Yeah.
People who actually engage with the content.
Yeah.
Is there a danger that people are either engaging with the content and then not engaging with the ads? And can you talk a little bit more about this slowness that you?
So when I talk about slow, I'm not just talking about time spent. I'm also talking about the intensity of focus that people have, and I think that is more. That happens more when you've got something that's editorial, when you're engaging your brain in long copy. So, and yes, you know, the advertising often is around that, but not as interruptive as in other environments, and sometimes it's relevant too. So it's more welcomed. When we ask the consumer about it, they are less annoyed by it, and that plays a role. And you will have seen from Lumen's work, you know, that actually it is getting attention, you know, that magazine websites online are getting attention, so that slower media is working. So hopefully that answers the question.
Well guys, it's lunchtime. Anna is around for more questions. I'm sure for those of you who didn't get time, please do. You're happy to answer questions?
Yeah, for sure.
Buttonhole her. Strongly advise you to go have a look at the Attention Hub because it really is a lovely, good resource.